I am the Philosophical Bachelor, and today I will be discussing the second chapter of the myth of Sisyphus, entitled The Absurd Man. Section 2.0 Preamble. The absurd man is one who does not do things for the sake of the eternal, according to Camus. Not that nostalgia is foreign to him, but he prefers his courage and his reasoning, he writes. Nostalgia is usually a nostalgia for the past, but Camus is talking about the future. How can this be understood? Before the time when a person becomes the absurd man, he had hopes, aims, and goals for the future. So this nostalgia is a nostalgia for this time in the past when he still had hope for the future. But now that he has become the absurd man, he no longer lives for the future but in the present. He does not have hope, but he can still count on his courage and his ability to reason. He knows that the world is absurd, but has the courage to refuse to delude himself that it is not. So he has to live without appeal to illusions, but instead count on his own resources of courage and reasoning. His reasoning informs him of his limits. Assured of his temporally limited freedom, of his revolt devoid of future, and of his mortal consciousness, he lives out his adventure within the span of his lifetime, writes Camus. The absurd man knows his lifespan is limited, that his ability to make sense of an unreasonable world, a world that cannot be reasoned with, is limited. But within such limits, he is free to do as he wishes. He struggles to live as well as he can within these absurd conditions, and it is an adventure, one that is as colourful and enjoyable as he makes of it. His lifetime is his field, his lifetime is his action, which he shields from any judgment but his own, adds Camus. The absurd man's life is the domain where he can do what he wants, and the only one able to judge whether he has a good life or otherwise is himself. No other person's judgment matters, he lives it on his own terms. A greater life cannot mean for him another life, according to Camus. I understand this in two ways. Another life can refer to the afterlife of a heavenly paradise, of which Camus has disavowed that promise of religion in the first chapter already. A more interesting interpretation is that, as Heidegger would say it, we are thrown into the world, and the circumstances of the era we were born in and our social conditions are givens in the sense that we had no role to play to determine them. They are just what they are. There is no choice in the matter. We cannot choose to be born to a rich family or a poor one, to loving parents or to no parents at all, in a time of war or of peace. There is only one life, and this life is it. If one wants their life to be greater or better, then one has to, in this life, go and make it that way. There is no other life for us to long or hope for. No amount of wishful thinking will make it such that we can go to sleep a pauper and wake up a king. On the other hand, a pauper can try to improve his conditions, while a king can ruin himself in his decadence. We have no control of the incidents of birth and other aspects of the world's absurdity, but to the extent that we can nonetheless try to live as well as we can, in our limited freedom, we have responsibility. Camus is not trying to lay down an ethical system. I have seen people behave badly with great morality, and I note every day that integrity has no need of rules, he writes. Camus thinks that people try to justify themselves by devising and following moral systems, but the absurd man has nothing to justify. He has no need to justify his actions. Everything is permitted, but that notion is not a comfort, but a bitter acknowledgement of a fact. For Camus, to have a divine entity lay down the rules and dish out purposes to our lives is far easier to live with than a freedom to act in whichever way, even badly, without fear of punishment. He explains, everything is permitted does not mean that nothing is forbidden. The absurd merely confers an equivalence on the consequences of those actions. Whether one chooses to do a particular action or another, there will be outcomes which must be considered calmly and which one should be ready to pay the price for. We should do what we do not out of a deference for authority, but instead choose to act by considering if we are willing to accept the consequences of our actions. For instance, if Janet steals some clothing so as to look good at a party, she risks jail time. If it is so important to look good at a party for Janet that going to jail is worth it, then Camus might agree that it is understandable why she does so. A life of crime is a possible way of life, just like a life spent working hard for the money is a possible way of life. We have to determine which path suits us better. The absurd mind cannot so much expect ethical rules at the end of its reasoning as rather illustrations and the breadth of human lives, he writes. In this chapter's later sections, he will examine 3 types of lives: a philanderer, an actor, and a warmonger. He does not give these examples because he thinks they are models of good living that we should adopt, but to point out that moral equivalence he has asserted of various types of lives. A sub-clerk in the post office is the equal of a conqueror, according to Camus. A man's failures imply judgment, not of circumstances but of himself. Whether one has lived a good life or not is a judgment that one needs to make of oneself, of one's actions. While Camus talks about not hoping for another life, which indeed is the case since no such possibility exists, I think a good way to understand this quote is to consider the same man born in 2 different eras. Say he was born in a time of general peace and can peacefully live out his life as a post office clerk, while if he has been born in the time of the Spartans, he would have been a great warrior. Who is to judge that the former is better or worse than the latter? That would be to judge the circumstances of birth, which is rather irrelevant since it is not something we can control. However, the clerk, like the conqueror, can likewise lead a good life. Who is to say a clerk's peaceful life is bad compared to a conqueror's life of violence, slashing, and killing? As Camus has said in the first chapter, we should aim for more experiences rather than goal-driven living, since the absurd man is agnostic of values. In his case studies in the later sections of this chapter, he looks at people who expand themselves, who maximize their experiences in their given time on Earth. I think of this like 2 similar candles that burn for an equal length of time. Candle alpha burns more brightly than candle beta, and Camus might agree that alpha has a better life. By lacking hope of any future, alpha has no reason to hold back but to burn as brightly as it can in the present moment. Everything that makes man work and get excited utilizes hope. The sole thought that is not mendacious is therefore a sterile thought. In the absurd world, the value of a notion or of a life is measured by its sterility, writes Camus. Hope for the future can be a powerful motivator, but instead of letting ourselves be caught up in dreams that might disappoint if unfulfilled, why not just live more fully in the present? Section 2.1 Don Juanism. Don Juan is the first of 3 paradigmatic examples of the absurd man for Camus. It is not through lack of love that Don Juan goes from woman to woman, explains Camus. Who is Don Juan? He is a legendary character depicted as a great lover of many women, a libertine. The legend was given literary form in 1630 in The Seducer of Seville by Tirso de Molina, and later found in many other works, including Mozart's opera Don Giovanni. At the height of his powers, Don Juan seduced a girl of noble descent. Her father, a commendatore or general, tried to avenge her and was killed by Don Juan. The commendatore's tomb had a stone statue of the man, and Don Juan invited it to dine with him. The ghost came, and there are various ways the story ends, which Camus elaborates upon. According to Camus, Don Juan loved every woman he had with equal passion and with his entire self. Each woman tried to give him what no one else could, but this only made Don Juan feel the need to keep repeating his love with others. He is a vivacious character, full of life. His laugh, the conquering insolence, that playfulness and love of the theatre are all clear and joyous, writes Camus. Don Juan is a man who knows what his abilities are and its limits. He does not hope for anything. He does not long for his desire to be satisfied such that he would be sated and lose his desire. He cares not for an afterlife. He is impious. He is like candle alpha, burning as brightly as it can. He is a man who seeks quantity in his joys, as Camus prescribes for the absurd man, and he satisfies them as efficiently as possible. His moral code is simply what he likes and dislikes. He is an ordinary seducer, except for the difference that he is conscious, and that is why he is absurd, explains Camus. Don Juan is lucid, aware of what he is doing, how others view him, and how he wants to live his life. He lives in sync with time, in the moment and not in the past. He does not collect women or memories of them. He does not indulge in nostalgia and has no regrets. Is he selfish? According to Camus, he is aware of the notions of great love, clothed in illusions of the eternal, a love that is totalizing towards its subject, terminating only in death, as the wedding vow goes, till death do us part. Don Juan is conscious of the mortal nature of the love he gives. He does not buy into the notions of romantic, long-lasting love that novels depict and have been ingrained into our collective understanding of what love is, where one is bound to one and only one specific person. Camus thinks such a love that binds to one person is a mixture of desire, affection, and intelligence, not in the same proportion for everyone. The absurd man multiplies what he cannot unify, writes Camus, suggesting that instead of being bound, to be liberated in one's attitude of love, recognizing that it is short-lived and exceptional. He thinks that Don Juan's way of loving many women is his way of giving and of vivifying to the women and to the world, which may differ from the way others want to contribute, but is still a contribution and hence not selfish. Those who feel that Don Juan was immoral and dissolute will be longing for his punishment, not only in this world but also the hereafter. Camus feels that Don Juan is prepared for it. He is conscious only insofar as he does not conceal its horror from himself, Camus writes. Don Juan knows that he is ridiculed, and he would consider it normal to be chastised. He understands how people view him, and is honorable and noble enough to have accepted all the rules of the game. Yet he knows he is right, and that there can be no question of punishment. A fate is not a punishment, writes Camus. Don Juan knows how he wants to live, and he lives it accordingly, and hence he does not think he deserves punishment. Camus uses the term fate, but I think it is not because Camus has an essentialist account of human life that there is a predestination where our lives have been predetermined. I think he is conveying that Don Juan is just acting out his true nature. He is being his authentic self, which then makes him innocent, for how can being your true self be wrong? One telling of the tale is that Don Juan was assassinated by Franciscans. Another was that the stone commendatore came to dinner to punish him. Camus thinks that the most believable account is that the ghost did not come to dinner, and Don Juan felt remorse, finally entering a monastery to live out his days in asceticism, though Camus denies the repentance aspect of that story, because he cannot see what refuge Don Juan could be seeking for from a god he did not believe in. Camus imagines Don Juan in his monkish cell, looking out into the Spanish plain, not reminiscing his glory days, but just looking quietly at the noble, soulless land in which he recognizes himself. It is what it is. He awaits death even though he does not look forward to it, knowing that all things come to an end and that the ultimate end is negligible. Death is negligible. Don Juan does not regret his life but simply recognizes life for what it is. Section 2.2 Drama. The stage actor is the second of the three paradigmatic examples of an absurd man. Camus contrasts two types of actors. The first he calls the thoughtless man and the second the absurd man. Not that all actors are the absurd man, but the one who truly inhabits his many roles illustrates Camus' concept of the absurd man. The thoughtless actor accepts the poetry without feeling the sorrow of his various roles. He enjoys the artistry of the writing but is not fully immersed into his character. The absurd actor goes beyond admiring the play, really penetrating into his character, becoming his character. Since over the course of his career he would have taken on many different roles, he would have in effect have lived many lives. Any fame is short-lived when compared against the age of the universe. Even the most acclaimed writers, artists, and kings will be forgotten in time. For a stage actor, his fame is even more ephemeral, since his work only lasts the duration of the play, while for a writer, his works might possibly outlast his lifetime. Camus published The Myth of Sisyphus in 1942, so this was the time before mainstream television and movies, which can capture the actor for posterity. The actor has the ability to inhabit multiple lives in his different roles, which speaks to Camus' ethics of quantity. The actor's goal is to embody his character perfectly, to project himself as deeply as possible into lives that are not his own. Within 3 hours, he must experience and express a whole exceptional life, writes Camus. The actor needs to lose his real identity as his person to find his real identity as an actor, which is also his real identity as a person who is an actor. In those 3 hours of the play, he travels the entire course of the character's life, which would normally take a lifetime to do, living it with an intensity that takes away all the dormant periods of silence and rest a normal person would have. Section 2.3 Conquest. This section is different from the rest of the book. Camus writes it as a monologue of an absurd conqueror. Camus' conqueror is the strong, quiet type who takes action but is also a lucid thinker about the human condition, and in that way his own condition. Camus wrote The Myth of Sisyphus during the Second World War. He was part of the French Resistance, and the tone of this chapter does seem autobiographical, though he does not attest to it. This section, however, makes more sense if the one speaking is a young man living during the war about to be caught up to fight, and not some famous warrior like Alexander the Great, though Camus' use of the term conqueror can evoke images of the latter. His conqueror seems not to be a man who fight by choice, but thrown into an era of war. He says, "Conscious that I cannot stand aloof from my time, I have decided to be an integral part of it." While he understands as an absurd man that winning or losing is a matter of indifference in the bigger scheme of things, he chose to join in the fight. Between history and the eternal, I have chosen history because I like certainties. Of it at least I am certain. And how can I deny this force crushing me, he asks. He feels the oppression of the enemy forces. And while in terms of eternity, whether he fights or surrenders, whether he lives or dies, makes little to no difference, he chooses to act, to fight. He is not going to take comfort in the eternal, in religion, to hope for God to save him and his country, but instead to make himself count in the present time. Tomorrow you will be mobilized. For you and for me, that is a liberation, says the conqueror. Like his fellow Frenchmen, they will be caught up to fight, removing any choice they had in the matter, hence liberating them from what was up to then a choice of staying safe at home or face dangers in defending their land. The individual can do nothing, and yet he can do everything, he writes. It seems futile to fight, since how can one single person's effort make a difference in a huge war? But on the other hand, it is such single efforts that collectively make a difference in war. Even if one by himself cannot make a difference, he has to act as if he can, for the larger war effort to succeed. While overtly Camus seems to be talking about World War II, he seems to also be using war as a metaphor for other political struggles, such as those for people's freedoms and rights, where the fight is in the form of protest and personal sacrifice. An absolute victory where all people are free and all their rights respected may be impossible, but nonetheless we must continue the struggle, to fight against our fate, our circumstances if we do not like them. I exalt man before what crushes him, and my freedom, my revolt and my passion come together then in that tension, that lucidity and that vast repetition, writes Camus. To lift up, to rescue the person who is being oppressed, we bring our freedom, revolt and passion, knowing lucidly that this struggle will need to be repeated till all people are free. Man is his own end, and he is his only end. If he aims to be something, it is in this life, he writes. The pursuit of our own happiness is our objective. We have no other life than this one, and so if we want to pursue an aim, which we think will give us that happiness, we have to do it in this life and not hope for some afterlife which may not exist. To conquer is also to conquer oneself, to conquer one's own doubts and fears. We may put on a pedestal famous conquerors, but they are capable of no more than man himself when he wants, according to Camus. The capacity to overcome that we see in great conquerors are also in us, and we can assess it when there is something we want badly enough. Our relations to other people invigorate our lives, and our intelligence is most acute in their midst. These terminate in death, but precisely because our lives are limited by death, the importance of our struggle is all the more significant. While Camus uses the archetype of Don Juan, the actor and the conqueror, to exemplify the absurd man, he reiterates that he is not intending that they serve as role models. He is simply using them to illustrate aspects of the absurd man. Anyone can be the absurd man, the chaste man, the civil servant, or the president of the republic. It is enough to know and to mask nothing. Being deprived of hope is not despairing, which is Camus' formula for how to live in an absurd world. For Camus, participating in the conqueror archetype was part of his fate, since he was living in a time of war. For those of us living in more peaceful times and places, it does not mean we have nothing to struggle against. As he has noted, the struggle need not be against a foreign aggressor. It can be a revolt for the emancipation of oppressed groups that we belong to or that live among us, or a more personal struggle against the circumstances of our life, be it poverty, injustice, or illness. The civil servant or the clerk's life may be far more ordinary than Don Juan, a stage actor, or a conqueror, but to face up to reality courageously and to live as good as we can, in spite of life's curveballs, is what we can all do. We may not have hope for an afterlife, but we have firmly a grip on this life, and we need not fall into an existential nihilistic despair, but can still live fulfilled lives if only we want to. Thank you. If you wish to support the Philosophical Bachelor, you can do so at worldwideweb.patreon.com/philosophicalbachelor.